Okay, we're at episode 11, part 11 of Why I'm Still Hating Enter the Dragon. Just to recap briefly, we've just finished a scene where Lee has royally beaten up all of the goofy guards. Han witnesses the battle and then says, "Oh, your battle with the guards is magnificent, and I was going to ask you to join us," which begged the question, what was Han going to use to negotiate with Lee on? It's really just kind of confusing, but I digress. So, we're in the courtyard now. Everybody's gathered. We see that Bolo has Lee tied up. That is, he has his hands tied behind his back. Bolo is carrying a knife, and John Saxon is also on the field. Han welcomes him. "Good morning, Mr. Roper. How would you like to take place into this morning's edification?" Thought-provoking question, to which John says, "Edification?" Then he sees Lee tied up and says, "What are you going to do to him?" And John is, or rather Roper's pissed off, and rightly so. He's just gone through a lot in the past 24 hours. He's had a major drug dealer in the Orient rather, reveal what he's doing, okay? He's seen his friend's body dropped in a vat of acid, and he's been low-level threatened by the inscrutable Han. So he's really ticked off, and rightly so. So he says, "What are you going to do to him?" He said, "Oh, not me, you." And of course, John, realizing what Bruce Lee did the following day to O'Hara, says, "Listen, there's a point I won't go beyond." And you know what? He wasn't going to go beyond that point anyway. And I'm kind of wondering about this because the day before, Han is revealing his whole operation to Roper. He's telling him he cleared his debt. He wants him to join. He really wants him to be his rep in America. So why does he switch and obviously set up a situation now where Roper will get killed? Let's just say that he accepted the fight with Bruce Lee. He undoubtedly would have gotten killed, just like O'Hara. So I'm not understanding what's Han's motivation for doing this. Because the last thing that he heard from Roper was, "There's no misunderstanding between us." So it seemed like there might have been a little wiggle room for them to work on something. And while I'm on this, I'd like to know what is Han offering anybody? He's built this whole empire. In fact, Roper even comments on it. It's a great way to recruit new talent. For what? What does Han want to do with this talent? What's he going to do with all of these bodies who are practicing every day? And how did he get all of these other people who came there years before he did? How did he get them to stay? What does he offer them? And you know what? The movie doesn't answer that question. They just stick him up there as a cartoon cutout. You're supposed to believe he's evil for no reason that they explain. I mean, I know this is a movie to showcase Bruce's talent. We know that. But you gotta have somewhat of a backstory. Excuse me. That cough annoys some people, apparently, but I won't get into that. Anyway, were the things that made Han this inscrutable villain who was once a valued member of the Shaolin Temple? We need that backstory. And if we had it, Enter the Dragon would have been a more powerful story. And that's where it fails to me. The story's not powerful enough because it refuses to, how can I say it, plug these plot holes, okay, which would have made it a more exciting movie, and a more thought-provoking and provocative movie. So, continuing on, this is John Saxon's big scene where he fights Bolo. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was intrigued. How is he going to beat this guy? And he actually uses a philosophy that, in the context of martial arts, can work. He took Bolo out of his environment. Bolo was used to fighting, if you want to call it that, people who are not running towards him like John Saxon is, but running away from him, being scared of him, giving him a chance to grab them and crush them into powder. John Saxon doesn't do that. He uses lateral movement, and he beats him with an unfamiliar weapon, a jab. And just in case you don't think that works, I recall a couple of years ago that a friend of mine who had virtually no martial arts training whatsoever, he had to fight a guy. My brother taught him one thing, the fastest thing he could teach him, a jab. And he beat the living daylights out of this guy with a jab. So it is possible. So Roper uses his one favorite technique. He uses the jab to set up the groin kick. And he hits him 3 times in the groin. Excuse me, that's enough to knock out anybody. And that's what happens. Now, all of a sudden, Han is freaking out. And he's calling various, I guess, excuse me, henchmen by their names to come out and fight. And it's such a hilarious scene because these guys are standing around going, what should I do now? And Han is saying, blah, 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 blah. And then they just go right out. They get beat up. And then he calls another pair. And you notice that nobody is moving unless Han calls them out. And I've got to say, what kind of fear does Han have over these guys that they stand around? They obviously don't want to fight, but when he calls them, they reluctantly just march out there to get beat up. Totally unrealistic. Okay, but here's some more unrealistic action that happens. I forget the girl's name, Mei Ling, or whatever the operative was. We see her down in the dungeon, and she's got keys to open up all of the cells, and all these vagabonds and ragamuffins and drunken men who've got no place to go and no one to go to and don't care where they're going to end up tomorrow morning come rushing out onto the field like, I don't know, like they're a football team. I got to ask, where does she get the keys from? I mean, are they on Han's nightstand? Does he have the keys on a hook on a wall somewhere? How does she get access to it? And I remember when I first saw this as a kid, I said, why doesn't one of these guys who probably hasn't seen a girl in a while, wait till everybody leaves and then just drags her into the cell? I just really wondered about that. So anyway, now all of these guys, they're fighting. And I was wondering, how do these guys, who they're in such a catatonic state that when Lee is beating up on the guards, they're just standing there. If you remember, they're just standing there at attention. Groups of these guys in a cell. And I'm wondering, how does Han feed these guys? What if they got to go to the bathroom or take a shower? They're just standing there. And all of a sudden now, when she lets them out, they're not only full of energy, but they're fighting. They're fighting like they've been training the whole time. And what's also crazy is, if it had been me and I had been let out, I would have been running to find a boat to get off the island. Nobody's doing that. Everybody's running out to fight. Okay, so you got this melee, and then you have Bruce Lee. He confronts Han, and he follows him into his museum. Okay, and what happens next? Let me see what happens next. Han does his best imitation of Wolverine by crashing into the display case and getting the three knives attached to his hand. Then Lee comes in with that epic speech. You have offended my family, and you have, sorry about that, guys. You have offended my family, and you have offended the Shaolin temple. And I gotta ask again, what was the offense that was so bad that it took another representative from the Shaolin temple to come and fight him? What did he do? Questions never answered. So, you know what happens. One of the most spectacular, beautifully, cinematically beautiful fights ever to be in a martial arts movie happens, which ends with Bruce Lee getting cornering Han and kicking a 60-year-old man onto a spear. Somebody mentioned in the comments that basically Bruce beats up a 60-year-old man, and I can't get that image out of my head. I don't know why that didn't really click with me. I mean, Han's an old guy. Bruce Lee is a young, energetic monk, full of testosterone, energy. He's been practicing regularly. I don't know how regularly Han's been practicing. And even if he was practicing every day, he's around 60 years old. How effective can he be against a guy like Lee? Okay. So, Lee wins. Movie ends. He comes upstairs. Everybody's dead, including Anna Capri, which I don't know why she didn't run for cover in the first place. And then we see the helicopters and the music score by Lalo Schifrin, I believe. Great score, by the way, comes in and the movie ends. And the last question I have to ask is this. When Han showed Roper his operation at the very beginning, and they entered this room full of women, he says, they are my daughters. Han says, they are my daughters and my most personal guard. Where were these women when Han was getting beat up in the courtyard by Bruce Lee and also in his museum? Where was his personal guard? You've got to think about this for a moment. The guy, if you have a personal guard, they're the best of the best. They've been chosen specifically to be your own CIA force to protect you. So their skills, I guess, have to be extraordinary in order to have that position. And they're your flesh and blood, allegedly. Apparently, they don't like Daddy's little girl. Daddy's little girl don't like him very much. So that's the final ridiculous plot hole that Enter the Dragon fails to plug. And that's why I hate Enter the Dragon. How about you, though? I'd like your comments, as always. And thanks for these couple of days of putting up with me. I am a lot better from my illness. I really wanted to share this with you because I was feeling kind of depressed, down and out, bored. I could have waited for a time when I was feeling better. But like I said, I wanted to share this with you. And I trust that you guys like the channel enough to tune in and appreciate the content, even though it's a departure from what I usually do. But that's about it. Can't wait to read your comments. Please make it specific to the movie, because some people want to go into little rabbit holes and, it's not necessary. We're discussing the movie, okay? When all is said and done, we're all fans of Bruce Lee. I am, and we all know this movie. that's touched us in some kind of way. So that's it, folks. This is Elgin Subway Surfer Bowling, normally your creative caricature marketing consultant. I can't switch off.